The most overrated player in baseball? The organization with the worst reputation among players? MLB players voted in the anonymous poll by The Athletic. We'll talk about the answers coming up on B-Shape Daily. What's going on, everyone, and welcome in to this edition of B-Shape Daily. Brenden Schaeffer here with you in the evening hours of Monday, June 10th, 2024. No Cardinal game today, so we thought, why not have a little fun and take a dive into the recent MLB Player Survey that came out courtesy of The Athletic. They call it the MLB Player Poll 2024. On their site, it's headlined with the phrase, worst organizations, the most overrated peer, best vibes guy, and more, as the group of anonymous MLB players were asked a series of questions, and the questions are interesting. The answers are pretty interesting as well. So I thought we'd go through some of it and also alert you to anything going on from a Cardinals angle. There was at least one former Cardinal that was noted among the most overrated players in MLB, and one current Cardinal on the player list for having the best vibes. So I'll explain more about what's going on with that and get into as well the question about, there was a question as to which team you'd want to play for most if money and contracts and stuff weren't part of the equation. We'll tell you how the Cardinals fared in that question, as well as the question of which organization has the worst reputation among players. We'll tell you if the Cardinals popped up in that one and the context for that. So that's all coming up on B-Shape Daily. If you enjoy daily Cardinals content or MLB content, make sure to hit that subscribe button as you watch this video. Hit like, and especially if you're a Cardinals fan, turn on the bell for notifications for when we post a new video or when the channel goes live, as we do sometimes as well. You won't want to miss it when we cover the Cardinals more closely than anything all season long. But let's go ahead and get into this poll from The Athletic. I'm not going to give everything away because it is, of course, behind a paywall, so you should go read it. But I want to talk about some of the tidbits, and you can check out the rest for yourself. We'll go through question by question, and I'll just let you know anything that stands out to me. The best player in baseball, honestly, not a very interesting answer because pretty much everybody said Shohei Ohtani. 46% said Ohtani, and there were other names in the mix. Acuna, Mookie Betts, Aaron Judge, Mike Trout got a bit of the vote, and then some others on the way down. But that one's not even that interesting, so we won't spend much time on it. Of course, it's Ohtani. And next year he'll be able to pitch again, too, so it'll be even more of an obvious answer. But it's funny, somebody answered and said, it's such a stupid answer, so vanilla, but he is. Like, even if you wanted to try to be creative with your answer, you can't. It's Ohtani is the correct answer. I think it's the only one that had an objectively correct answer. A lot of other great players in the game today, but Ohtani's, he is the best one. Who is the most overrated player in baseball is a lot more fun of a question. And the Athletic article starts off saying, unsurprisingly, players were not as keen to respond to this question, and those who did were less aligned on their answers. So not a consensus as it was in the case of Shohei Ohtani taking up almost half the voting body on being the best player in baseball. Number one, most overrated, Jazz Chisholm for the Miami Marlins, which is kind of interesting. I don't know that I would have come up with that off the top of my head, but when you think about sort of comparing the reputation and the attention that he gets, and maybe part of that for guys was that he got the MLB The Show cover, I think it was last year, and then, you look at his numbers, and he's a solid player, having a good season, but more along the league average line in terms of offensive numbers. He's got a 745 OPS. Last year was a 761. So, for his career, he's a 103 OPS plus. I think that's actually fair. The answer is actually fair because, and maybe I'm reading too much into the MLB The Show cover, but for a guy that's not really, he had an all-star season in 2022, so he was coming off of that year, I guess, when they chose the cover athlete. But he's been largely just kind of a league average player offensively for his career. Plays with flair, and that's real exciting. But, yeah, I guess it's not even totally unfair to say that, if he gets more attention than what his performance is on the field, that would be, you'd be considered overrated. Number two, I don't really agree with their answer. Anthony Rendon got over 10% of the vote as the second most overrated player. Jazz Chisholm was about 20%. I don't really think Anthony Rendon is overrated because I don't know if anybody is actually rating him anymore. Like, I think universally he's kind of reviled, or people sort of ignore him because he's always injured, doesn't want to play through anything, and he's just completely fallen off the map. The Athletic noted that it was interesting that 5 years ago, doing this poll, that's the last time and the only time, in fact, that Anthony Rendon was an all-star. My gosh, ever since going to the Angels on that big contract, he has been just pretty much a bust. Had a really good first year, but it was in a partial season. Well, no, it wasn't a partial season. I'm sorry, that was the COVID year. Played 52 games out of 60, but after that, he's been acting like it's a COVID year every year with the limited playing time that he's had. Every year since then, he's played fewer than 60 games, so understandable that he would be on the list, I guess, but I just didn't think anybody was really rating him anymore. He's getting attention more for the comments that he makes, but it's always been sort of a negative standpoint, I feel like, in more recent years. But anyway, 10% of MLB players said Rendon. Maybe they're just tired of hearing about him and wanted a chance to kind of go off, but there you go, 10%. Carlos Correa is up there pretty high. Tim Anderson up there, but with the fifth most votes, Jack Flaherty, former Cardinal, as one of the most overrated players in baseball, and the highest ranked pitcher in this category, right? That is really interesting. I'm scrolling for other pitchers here. Blake Snell got 3.3%. Other pitchers on the list. It's funny, like Javier Baez is on this list. Yordan Alvarez is on the receiving votes category, but not inside the top of the leaderboard. That's kind of interesting to me. I think Alvarez is pretty properly rated as just being a stud hitter that he is. Yamamoto's on there, got a vote or two. Spencer Strider? Like, that's, I don't know, man. Emmanuel Clase is on here. I think he might be the only relief pitcher that's on there. That's kind of crazy because I feel like Emmanuel Clase is properly rated as one of the best relievers in baseball. Kind of interesting. Former Cardinal Adolis Garcia on there. Although, maybe it just seems like maybe an attention factor. Like Alek Manoah is on here. Who is currently rating Alek Manoah as anything? I don't really understand that one. Some interesting names on here for the most overrated. Garrett Cole, that feels just like personal. I think he's a great pitcher when he's out there and healthy. Some of these feel... The one that's funniest to me, Jeimer Candelario, is in the receiving votes category for being the most overrated. I wonder if that was like a former teammate or something that was just like, I'm going to put him out there just to be funny, like an inside joke almost. It's interesting, though. That's like one of the toughest questions because these guys know that the poll is anonymous, but at the same time, like, you just got to really trust the resource that they're not going to burn you, or that whatever you said isn't going to get out, which, the Athletic is pretty darn reputable, but you can understand how players might be a little hesitant. Several players we asked said they would hesitate to call anyone at the pro level overrated. Quote, I just feel like this game is too hard. I don't want to be talking bad about someone else's game. Yeah, like, that's one of those where you're in the back of your mind going, oh, man, I hope I don't get votes for this one as you're answering it. So to say somebody else's name, I don't know. That could be a little bit dicey. They added in here that it's interesting that Bryce Harper received one vote despite making almost half the votes for the category 6 years ago in 2018. He was 62% of the responses in 2019. Said one player who was informed of this fact, it's not Bryce anymore. As in, I guess he came around. At the time, he was getting all that attention and maybe people thought he was overrated, but now he's kind of backed it up. I don't know if that's really... Like, he's always been great. He's always been great, I thought. I'm going to check his numbers because maybe I'm missing something. But I guess the question asker said, hey, y'all used to vote for Bryce Harper, and now you don't anymore. His numbers were never bad. 2018, 2019, he's got a higher OPS now than he did then, but not by a ton. Kind of interesting. Bryce Harper's always been a stud. So it's weird. Again, it's an attention factor. And then some of the guys are quoted. On Julio Rodriguez got a couple votes. I think he's a great player, but just rated so high. Throwing him around with Acuna and Trout and those guys. Maybe eventually, but right now, I don't know how you could say that. I want to know who was in this poll. I know it's anonymous, but man, there's a lot of interesting ones. There's a lot of, some names that are interesting here. So I'm like, who's coming up with these answers? One person said Juan Soto could be a spite pick, to be honest. I feel like all he does is walk and hit singles and doesn't hit for power like he's portrayed. Also not a good fielder. I mean, some of these quotes, they are letting these guys have it because it's anonymous, which is the way it's got to be. Otherwise, you don't really get good answers. Good question here. Put aside their stats, going solely on vibes. Who do you most want on your team? And they specified it must be someone that you're not friends with and you don't know very well. That's kind of fun. And this is where you do see a current Cardinal get some votes. Mookie Betts, I think, was the leader in the clubhouse on this one for understandable reasons. Ohtani got 6.3%. I don't know. Maybe the guys that know Ohtani, that's interesting because how can you separate his talent and his stats? When you're talking about you want Ohtani on your team, you're talking about his talent and his stats. He's not really out there. He's not really outspoken. One player who eventually voted for a different NL candidate had to give himself a pep talk beforehand. Quote, I'm not going to say Shohei. I'm not doing it. Yeah, because I think honestly, let's be real. If people are voting Ohtani as best vibes and saying they're ignoring the stats, that's just like saying in a court trial, oh, jury, strike that from the record. Like, okay, we know they technically are supposed to, but I've never been on a jury. I imagine that's difficult to do. Yeah, pretend you didn't hear that thing. They're telling players, pretend Ohtani isn't a superhuman freak of a baseball player. Just judge him on his personality. It's funny. That is pretty funny. But I get it. I mean, I think a lot of people are just enamored with him, and they would like to probably get to know him and see what he's all about. So I can understand that answer. Lance Lynn on the list. He is about 7th or 8th down behind guys like Acuna, Harper, Judge. Lance Lynn getting 3.1% along with a couple other guys, Mike Trout included. I imagine at the top of this page it would say how many guys they asked. And I could certainly do them. It says more than 100 players were interviewed, granting them anonymity to get their unfiltered takes. But if you just wanted to do the math, and it's like, okay, what would the denominator of this fraction have to be for 4.2% and then 3.1%? Like there's a group of guys at 4.2, a group of guys at 3.1. So I'm sure we could do a little math and figure out the exact number of players that were asked, because it seems like you're counting one vote at a time to jump those percentages. Anyway, close to 100, give or take, whatever it was. But Lance Lynn, I think that's interesting and makes a lot of sense. He does some wacky things on the field. Wears the glove on his head. Got ejected by Angel. Lance Lynn's always cussing at people for bunting on him. Demonstrative on the mound. I think people just see some of those highlights and they're like, I want to see what that guy's all about. So I can understand why a number of people would have answered Lance Lynn for the teammate or for the player that they would want on their team solely on vibes. I could absolutely see it. Question number 4 was evaluate this statement. Anthony Rendon was right. The season is too long. Though he may be an imperfect messenger, Rendon's comments earlier this year on length of the MLB season resonated with many and sparked conversations both online and off. Of course, like I said, Rendon was kind of reviled for his comments, one of which was the season's too long. This is just a guy that does not seem to enjoy baseball. That seems to be the long and short of it. Several who voted no. I'm trying to find the total percentage on this one. I'm pretty sure most players said no, the season is not too long. That was the overwhelming view, is that it's fine how it is. It looks like about 2/3 said no, the season's not too long. About 1/3 of the guys said it was. One of the players who voted no said, F that, I get paid more. Yeah, fair enough. I think some guys are saying, I don't mind the number of games, but spread it out a little bit longer so you get more off days. I don't know that most people would say that because it feels like the 6-month season is also pretty long. I think that the off season, Those guys would probably want it to be about as long as it can be. Here's a question that's really interesting. And we talk about this from a Cardinals perspective a lot, how you can offer a contract to a free agent, but they have to want to come. How often did John Mozeliak bring this up in the offseason when it came to guys like Sonny and Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson? They got guys that wanted to be here. Well, here's a chance to figure how a lot of the guys around the league view the Cardinals. See if any of them answered, which team would you sign with if contracts, state taxes, and rosters were not a factor? I mean, you could answer this based on the uniforms, the stadium, the city itself, but taking out the contracts, taxes, and because I'm telling you, the taxes thing is big for a lot of guys. Remember, Tommy Pham was going to sign with, I think it was back with the Padres, maybe California team or something, but ended up going with the White Sox, not because they had a better chance to win, but because the tax differential, I guess the Padres or whoever it was, wasn't going to match what the value of the White Sox contract was. So he said, that's more money for me. That's what I got to do. So taxes is a factor a lot of times. Rosters, people want to play on a team that's good. But the premise of the question says, take all that out of it. What team would you want to play for? The Atlanta Braves captured 12.7% of the vote. Some guys said they were Braves fans growing up. I would sign with the Braves knowing what I know. If I didn't know, I would probably try and play one more year for the Red Sox or Yankees just to do it, just to experience that. Probably the Red Sox. I love that stadium. Interesting. I would sign with the Braves knowing what I know. Wonder what that means. But the Braves easily took the top spot here on the team that most guys would want to play for, 12.7%. 86 votes on this particular answer. I've now pulled up the poll on my phone instead of on the laptop because the desktop version is not nearly as good. 102 voted on the best player in baseball, so I guess that's generally the sample. But some guys didn't want to answer every question, I suppose. The Red Sox, Dodgers, Rangers, Yankees, Cubs ranked pretty highly. You'd have to go down pretty far to find the Cardinals on which team would you sign with if contracts were not a factor. 86 votes. There's a number of teams at 2.3%. So what does that tell me? 86 times 0.023. Basically, two people voted for the Rays, Mariners, Giants, Mets, Twins. The Cardinals got a vote, but just one. They were mentioned by one of the 86 players said, if contracts, taxes, rosters were not involved, I'd pick the Cardinals as the team I'd want to sign with. So that's not very glowing. Players got to want to come here. You can offer them money, but it doesn't seem like the Cardinals are very destinational. And again, this is not a full sample of MLB players, but 86 votes. But granted, you'd have to be, to get that vote, you'd have to be one random player's number one choice, right? There might be a lot of players who are amenable to coming to the Cardinals, but they might be more like the fourth or fifth choice if all else is equal. But obviously, when you eventually come to free agency, all else is not equal, right? Like, money is a factor. There are certain things that teams can do to try and compel a guy to sign. But there's about 16, 18, I'm not going to count it up, but probably 18 teams that got more votes than the Cardinals in this poll. So what do you think of that? Does it surprise you? Probably not. I don't think a lot of people would be surprised to learn that. And by the way, when you think about what factors into that, it's not just the organization itself. We'll get to a question like that here in a moment. But it's more about, for most people, location, right? And for as much as the Cardinals have a good thing going on, and they've got a nice stadium, and they've got Ballpark Village, and there's some action, it's baseball heaven, right? St. Louis is not destinational as a city. It just isn't. It makes me sad to say it, but it's the reality. I think a lot of these places are, Los Angeles, anytime you're on a coast, Chicago, New York, San Diego. those are going to be cities. Even Miami got a few votes, and I can't fathom picking Miami for any other reason than the city itself, the location. A couple people said Tampa Bay Rays. You'd live in Tampa. St. Louis doesn't really get that benefit of the doubt, so I wouldn't read too much into that. It doesn't surprise me, though. At least the Cardinals got a vote, I guess I would say. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It looks like 24, 25-ish teams in total ended up with at least one vote. And, the Cardinals did. So I'd have to go through and see who did not get named. The Athletics did not get named. I can find that off the top. But I bet they're going to be named in this next question. What organizations have had bad reputations? Which ones have bad reputations among players? Multiple answers were allowed to this question. So if you wanted to dump on multiple organizations, you can if you'd like. Only 79 of the players responded, and that's out of, 102 or so. But I bet you can guess which number one is. The Oakland Athletics, 40 of the 79 respondents said, yeah, the A's have a bad reputation among players. And I don't think that's too complicated. We all know why that is. The White Sox, almost a quarter of respondents to this one said the White Sox, 19 out of 79. The Angels, the Rockies, and the Mets are rounding out the top 5. Cardinals fans, don't worry. You didn't get multiple votes, but you did get one. What organizations have bad reputations among players? 1 out of 79 players said the Cardinals have a bad reputation among players. Curious. Mentioned once, so I think that's fine. That's all right. If the Cardinals had been mentioned like 4 or 5 times on this, again, this is another one of those questions that most players are going to be a little bit reluctant to even answer. And so for Oakland to get a bunch is kind of the easy cop-out because you can say, oh, look what they're doing is they're leaving the city that they're in. They're basically, that owner. It's easy. That's like the cop-out answer. Again, just like Shohei being the best player in baseball, like if you could only pick one, the Athletics probably have a bad reputation among most players. So I get that. It's funny that the White Sox got as many as they did. For a team that's not presently moving or conspiring to move from its city, the White Sox got 19 out of 79. Some of the answers on the Athletics were funny, though. It doesn't seem like they want to win. Quote, I mean, have you seen what they're doing to the city of Oakland and their fans? Quote, I've heard Oakland is pretty rough. Sacramento for 3 years. I've been to that ballpark before. I can't find something better. Super funny. All of that's accurate, though, about the Oakland Athletics. White Sox, quote, I've never heard a good thing. Poor communication cited as one of the reasons. It's not good over there. You can tell by how often there's turnover that it usually means something is going on. Players leaving the organization automatically doing better with their new team. It's interesting, though, because that's a criticism often levied to the Cardinals. But only one of the 79 players said the Cardinals. The Rockies, this was kind of good. You can kind of guess at who this might be. Quote, I think it's better now, but when I was there, it was horse shit, said the Rockies. Oh, please let this have been Arenado. But I have no idea. Doesn't really read to me like something he would say. But anyway. On the Pirates, quote, they actually have money and just won't spend it on players. Yeah, there was a whole expose, and I think the Athletic did that story too a few months ago on Pirates ownership and not spending. What is the most irritating criticism of the current game coming from former players? These are kind of fun. This is like a fill-in-the-blank answer. You don't actually vote. You just give a good quote. Bat flips, pimping home runs, overlooking the current game's degree of difficulty. There were some categories, I guess. Celebrations was one. We're having too much fun. Former players get all up in arms about the celebrations. The other one, overlooking the game's degree of difficulty. Basically, it might be kind of more difficult than when you played it. Quote, just throw strikes. Their strike zone was 3 times the size. Yeah. Lack of toughness is the other chief complaint. But I think that's common across all sports eras, Oh, they're not as tough as they used to be. The old timers are always going to have something to complain about. But it is kind of fun to see some of those answers. Those were the 3 main categories, though, that it broke down into. Toughness, celebrations, and not understanding how hard it is to play today compared to back when they played. That seems kind of fair. I could side with the players on all 3 of those, probably. Should MLB, this is a really interesting one. Should MLB shut down mid-season so players can play in the 2028 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles? 53% said no. 46%, though, said yes. Quote, it depends on how serious every country would take it. If the Dominican fields a pretty good roster and Venezuela, that would be cool. Yeah, man, this will be a topic 4 years from now because the Paris Summer Olympics that are going on in, 6 weeks or whatever it is, there is no baseball in that Olympics. And I was talking about this on the big show today with my co-host Andy, and I didn't even, as we were talking on the show today, I didn't even realize or remember, other than vaguely, that the 2020 Olympics, which actually happened in 2021, baseball was a sport in the Olympics again for the first time since 2008 in Beijing, and it happened in 2021 during the season, but it was only prospects and non-affiliated players that participated. Minor league guys, I think, could be cleared to do so through their organizations, if I recall. But then guys like Todd Frazier, who just wasn't on a team at the time, could play. So guys that were either retired or close to it. But they didn't shut down the season. It just happened during the summer, and they found, a roster full of players. The United States came in second. They got the silver medal. But I honestly think that it would benefit MLB in the long run. And I would bet you Rob Manfred would agree with this if he could get everybody on board, because he's always about globalizing the game. I think it benefits the game of baseball long term, and maybe MLB in conjunction with that, to have the best in the world on that stage. And it is in LA, so it's not like it would be all too difficult to pull off. How long you'd have to shut it down? Maybe a week and a half. They could schedule it to where it wouldn't be that big of a deal. I think it's a really easy solution, personally. You do it instead of the All-Star game that year and just widen the All-Star break a little bit. Right? And I think the timing of that could even line up. And if not, that's 4 years from now. They could figure out the dates of when the baseball part of the Olympics happen, and they could just coincide whatever the All-Star break would be with that Olympic break. And that would seem to be a pretty easy solution. Oh, but no All-Star game. Yeah, who cares? As much as the All-Star game is fun, it's not the end of the world if they didn't have it for a year, because instead we're watching Olympic caliber baseball. That seems like such an obvious decision to me that I'm surprised it's even in question. Some players said, yes, the season should be shut down, 46%. I think it would be a blast. You only have so many times to potentially participate, is what another player said. Quote, if the players aren't affected with pay, I'm all about representing your country. If we can somehow still get a full season, then I'm on board with it. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily shorten the season from 162 just to do it. But as one player said, I'm scrolling down the quotes here, if there's a way they could get rid of the All-Star game that year, that would be pretty cool. It's a unique opportunity, and now that baseball is back in the 2028 Olympics, I feel like guys would want to do it. Big names came to the World Baseball Classic in the most recent edition, so there were some players. More players said no than yes, interestingly enough. 56% said no, don't shut the season down for the Olympics. Injuries would go through the roof. To be honest, we, the U.S., would be too good, and we'd destroy and win everything. Whoa. I don't know about all that one, Chief. The World Baseball Classic happens every 4 years as well, and you didn't destroy everything in the last one. Played well, and the United States took it seriously. Maybe not the pitchers, because half the Cardinal rotation was the United States rotation, and that's probably not indicative of what you want. Waino and Michaelis last year, didn't work out for their seasons. But the position player group was loaded. And Japan has won more WBC titles than any other country. So I don't know about, that's pretty haughty to say the U.S. would be too good, that it's not even worth doing. One guy said, I'd love to play in the Olympics, but I don't know what that would look like. I come back from 3 days off and my timing is shot. Yeah, guys would be maybe a little worried about it impacting their season. One player said the WBC is better anyway. I don't know about that. I don't know that there's any way to know that. Because you haven't, 2008 was the last time you really had baseball in the Olympics. 2021 it happened, but again, it was not what it would be if you let MLB players play in it. However, another player said no, the reason being, and this is an anonymous player, but he said, being an Olympian and being on a 40-man roster gave me an opportunity to play at a high level while I was still in the minors. It gives other kids and older vets an opportunity to get their name back on the map, potentially find a job. So this player thinks, hey, it should work the way that it worked in 2021, have older free agent veterans have a chance to show their wares and maybe get on a contender or something toward the end of, because it'd be July when the Olympics happen, get on a team for the end of that season versus, I don't need the chance. I'm already playing in the big leagues. I feel good about that. Younger players had a chance to shine as well. I don't know. I'm always in favor of, when it comes to the Olympics, the best in the world getting the chance to do it. Doesn't really matter the sport. So for me, like, it used to be that you had to be amateur, and then they lifted that rule for the NBA players, and the Dream Team in 92 happened. Like, I get it. United States dominates at this point in basketball. So what? That's the spirit of the Olympics, is like, bring your best. Bring your country's best. That's the way it ought to be. I've got no problem with that. They asked a question in this survey about, have analytics helped or hurt your career? 76% said it helped. 10% said has made no difference. Some said, 8% said a little bit of both. Only 3.2% says that analytics have hurt their career without saying that it's also helped. One of the quotes there, I'm not a power guy. I like to put it in play. And analytics say you need to hit for power. Just a select few who say, I don't want the analytics. I just want to listen to my body and go on instinct. But most are in favor of analytics, which I think should tell fans a little something about, we always kind of poo-poo it, but I think there's obviously, it's almost like a no-brainer that, of course, you would consult analytics, because it's a buzzword, but it doesn't mean the big scaries that you think it means, right? It's useful. It's information. That's what guys are after, and more information to play better is something that I think a lot of guys are in favor of, at least according to this poll, and that answer does not surprise me. Here's a fun one. Number 10, there's a few more questions on this poll. Asked about the salary cap. They asked about if you'd like one. They asked about whether the Dodgers' spending spree was good for baseball, if they liked it. But the last one I'm going to touch on is whether you have seen or heard of a player being put on the injured list when they weren't actually injured enough to merit it. 64% said yes, I have heard of that. 36% said no. LOL, just a few times. Oh yeah, 100%. One guy, while nodding his head, widening his eyes, said no. But he's nodding his head at the same time as he's doing that. I've seen it a lot. I came from a system that does it all the time, or did it all the time. It just makes sense, though, because as one guy said, how can you possibly combat it? Trainers have notes that cover everything. You can go on the IL for fatigue. And, like, you can think about Giovanni Gallegos, his impingement to his shoulder, right? He's come back and he's pitching for Memphis now, doing the rehab thing, gives up homers. Maybe he wasn't really so injured. He just has kind of lost it right now and doesn't seem to have it. We'll see what the Cardinals do with him. I think he's got another rehab appearance coming up this week, and then they're going to make a decision. But yeah, it happens, and especially when it comes to relief pitchers. Hey, we're either going to option you to AAA because we need an arm, or we'll put you on the IL and get you big league time. That's real, said one player. So yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all, but it was kind of interesting to see enough players being so wide open about it. So that's kind of a glimpse. Went into some detail there on the Athletic Player Survey. Check it out at The Athletic. A lot more than we read about there. But biggest takeaways from a Cardinals perspective, Jack Flaherty considered one of the most overrated players in baseball by his peers. Again, he only got 5% of the vote. So, but like to have multiple people reach a consensus and say, yeah, this guy is overrated, kind of interesting. And maybe, not a good time for it, because when you think about how Jack Flaherty is rated now, not that highly. He only got a 1-year contract, so teams weren't rating him very well. And his numbers are great. I mean, he's on an all-star track right now. 94 strikeouts in 72 innings, 3.22 ERA with a sub-1 whip. He's been very good this year for the Tigers, and all he needs to do is stay healthy the rest of the way, and he's going to get that multi-year contract. But I would have said Jack Flaherty, you could have called him overrated before this year, but some of those players may need to take a look at his numbers this year. Granted, when was this poll taken? That's probably something that I should take a quick look at to try to give you that information, because it's going to be relevant to the answers. It may have been spring training. Yeah, this spring, over the course of 2.5 months, interviewed more than 100 players. So there you go. This is not something that has happened since the year began, which maybe colors the Jazz Chisholm inclusion a little bit more. 2022, he was awesome, and then last year his OPS went down 99 points, and his OPS plus was league average, 100. And then, he was on the video game cover, so a lot of people probably said, Jazz Chisholm, what's he on game covers for? Had one good year. But Jack Flaherty, I bet he won't be on the list next year if it comes about that he's able to stay healthy, because he's having a good year this year. And Jack, it's not like he signed a big old contract. Signed a 1-year deal. But that was on there. Lance Lynn got the vibes check. He passes the vibes check, as a few people said that they would want to be his teammate solely because of the vibes. And the Cardinals had one player respond that they're an organization with a bad rep among players, but they also had one player respond that said they are the team they'd most want to play for if contracts and taxes and rosters were not part of the equation. So city, stadium, reputation, history, ownership, whatever might bake into that. So one player said it. I imagine it wasn't somebody currently on the Cardinals. I don't know if that was illegal, if people were allowed to answer, even if it's the team that they're on. I don't know. It'd be better if it wasn't a current Cardinal, because that would imply somebody else out there wants to be on the team. Maybe it was Tommy Pham. I don't know. But I thought that'd be a little bit fun for tonight, because we don't have any updated Cardinals talk really to have. I did get a chance to listen to John Mozeliak's Blogger Day comments today, but I didn't have it in me tonight to do some editing and dive into all that. But there were some interesting things said. Viva Alberto's put the podcast of it out if you guys want to check it out, because I know a lot of people were asking me, like, is there audio of that? What's the deal? I know Viva Alberto's recorded the John Mozeliak session with the bloggers and podcasters on Blogger Day, so check that out if you're interested. And we might get a chance later in the week to talk about it. We'll see. But Cardinals games ramp back up on Tuesday. Paul Skeens taking on Miles Michaelis at Busch Stadium. Make sure, too, to check out our podcast from yesterday and our other videos on the YouTube channel. If you want Cardinals coverage, we're bringing it. Bringing the heat 7 days a week. I think since March 28th, there's only been a couple days, if maybe one, that we haven't posted a video on YouTube. So we're doing a lot of Cardinal stuff. Even when I go on like a trip or something, I'm usually trying to schedule something. So hopefully you guys are enjoying everything, and I'm enjoying bringing it to you. So hit subscribe and be along for the ride. Also, channel memberships are still a thing. If anybody new wants to join the channel membership, you can do that. The link is in the description. But that's going to do it for this edition of the show. I appreciate you guys, as always, for listening, and we'll talk to you next time on Be Safe Daily. Peace.